Malcolm Reed woke before his alarm the way he always did now. The room was still dark, the kind of dark that pressed in on your thoughts and made them louder. Rain tapped against the window in a steady, patient rhythm, like it had all the time in the world. Malcolm lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling, listening. Somewhere down the hall, a floorboard creaked as the house settled. He sighed and swung his legs off the bed. This was how morning started in Harrisonville, Ohio. Quiet, gray, heavy. A small town where the streets felt familiar enough to walk with your eyes closed, yet unforgiving enough that a single mistake could follow you for years. Malcolm moved through the house carefully, trying not to wake his son. He brewed coffee, the cheap kind that smelled stronger than it tasted, and leaned against the counter while it dripped. His shoulders ached, the dull reminder of last night's warehouse shift. He rolled them once, winced and let it go. Pain had become background noise. A framed photo sat on the kitchen shelf. Letitia smiled back at him, her head tilted slightly, one hand resting on Jamal's shoulder. Malcolm didn't stop to stare. Some mornings looking too long felt dangerous. He picked up Jamal's lunchbox instead and began packing it. Sandwich, apple, a note folded small. He wrote one every day even though Jamal pretended not to care. By the time Jamal shuffled into the kitchen, rubbing sleep from his eyes, Malcolm was already in motion. "Morning, buddy," Malcolm said. Jamal nodded, climbing onto a chair. "It's raining again." "Looks like it." Malcolm slid the plate of eggs toward him. "Eat up. We're leaving in 10. Jamal poked at his food. "Coach says if it rains this much, practice might get canceled." Malcolm smiled faintly. "Guess that's one upside." They didn't talk much after that. They didn't need to. Life had taught them both how to live inside quiet. The drive to school took them through the center of town. Harrisonville didn't change much. Same diner on Main Street. Same hardware store where Malcolm worked during the day. Same courthouse standing solid and pale at the end of the block, like it had been watching everyone for decades. Malcolm dropped Jamal off, waited until he disappeared inside, then sat in the truck for a second longer than necessary. He rested his forehead against the steering wheel and exhaled. Another day. Another set of responsibilities. Another stretch of time where everything depended on him holding it together. He pulled back onto the road, headed toward work. That's when he saw them. At first he thought they were just shadows. Two small shapes tucked under the narrow awning of the closed convenience store on Cedar Street. But as he drew closer, the shapes shifted. Small shoulders hunched. Thin arms wrapped around themselves. Backpacks slumped at their feet, darkened by rain. Malcolm slowed without meaning to. They were children. Two little girls, no older than 8. Their hair was plastered to their faces. One of them kept peeking toward the road, eyes wide, then looking away again like she was afraid of being seen and afraid of not being seen at the same time. Malcolm drove past the store. He told himself someone else would stop. A teacher. A neighbor. Anyone. But his hands tightened on the steering wheel. In his rearview mirror he caught one last glimpse of them. The smaller girl leaned into the taller one, trembling. The taller one tried to stand straighter, like she thought being brave might be enough. Malcolm's foot eased off the gas. His mind started listing reasons. He was already late. He didn't know those kids. This town wasn't dangerous, but it wasn't perfect either. He had a job to get to. A son depending on him. Enough complications already. Then he thought of Jamal. Of mornings just like this. Of rain soaking through thin jackets. Of what it felt like to be small and scared and waiting for someone who might not come. Malcolm turned the truck around. The tires hissed as he pulled up beside the curb. He lowered the window. Rain misted in immediately. "Hey," he said, keeping his voice calm, steady. "You girls okay?" The taller one stepped forward just a little. Her chin lifted, though her hands shook. We're waiting for our dad," she said. Her voice was thin but determined. Malcolm nodded. "All right. But you're freezing out here." The smaller girl looked up at him, eyes glossy. "We're not supposed to go with strangers." Malcolm felt something twist in his chest. "That's smart," he said. "How about this? I don't go anywhere. You just sit in the truck, stay dry, and we figure out what to do next together." The girls looked at each other. A silent conversation passed between them. Finally, the taller one nodded once. Malcolm opened the door. As they climbed inside, dripping rain onto the floor mat, Malcolm had no idea that this simple choice, this pause in an ordinary morning, was about to reach far beyond a rainy street in a small town. And if stories about ordinary people making one small decision matter to you, stay with us. This one is just beginning. The rain followed Malcolm all the way home. It drummed against the roof of the truck, steady and unrelenting, like it had decided to settle in for the day. The wipers squeaked as they moved back and forth, barely keeping up. In the passenger seat, the two girls sat close together, knees tucked in, hands clenched in their laps. Neither spoke. The smaller one kept glancing at Malcolm, then quickly looking down again as if afraid to take up too much space. Malcolm kept his eyes on the road. He wasn't scared exactly, but he was alert in a way that made his shoulders tense. Every instinct he had as a father was switched on. He adjusted the heater slightly, angling the warm air toward them. "You can warm your hands if you want," he said, nodding toward the vent. The taller girl hesitated, then slowly held her palms out. The smaller one followed a second later. Their fingers were red from the cold. "I'm Malcolm," he added. "You already heard that part. You want to tell me your names?" There was a pause. The truck rolled past familiar streets, houses with porches and wind chimes, lawns turning muddy from the rain. "I'm Layla," the taller girl said finally. Her voice was soft but steady. "This is Nina." Nina gave a small wave without lifting her eyes. "Nice to meet you both," Malcolm said. "How long have you been waiting back there?" Layla shrugged. "A while." "That could mean 5 minutes or an hour," Malcolm said gently. Layla glanced at Nina before answering. "We don't know. The bus stopped. Our teacher said to stay put. But it was raining and then things got confusing." Malcolm nodded. He didn't push for more. Kids explain things in pieces, not timelines. They drove in silence for another minute. Malcolm turned onto his street, a narrow row of modest houses with peeling paint and tired-looking mailboxes. He parked in front of his place, killed the engine, and turned to face them. "All right," he said. "Here's the deal. We're going inside to get you dry. I'm going to make a phone call, see if we can find your dad. You're not in trouble. You didn't do anything wrong." Nina's shoulders dropped slightly, like she'd been holding them up all morning. Inside, the house smelled faintly of coffee and detergent. Malcolm handed them towels and pointed them toward the bathroom. "Dry off as best you can," he said. "I'll grab you something warm to drink." Jamal peeked out from his room, curiosity written all over his face. Malcolm caught his eye and gave a small shake of his head. "Not yet." While the girls changed into dry clothes, Malcolm dug out from Jamal's dresser old shirts that were too big but clean. He paced the kitchen with his phone pressed to his ear. The school office rang and rang. He left a message. His voice sounded calm, controlled. He didn't mention the fear creeping up his spine. When Layla and Nina reappeared, wrapped in oversized sweatshirts, they looked less like two kids caught in a storm and more like two kids who didn't quite know where they belonged. Malcolm poured hot chocolate into mismatched mugs and slid them across the table. "Careful," he said. "It's hot." Nina wrapped both hands around the mug, inhaling the steam. "It smells good." "That's because it is," Jamal said, appearing at Malcolm's side. "Dad makes it extra chocolatey." Malcolm shot him a look. Jamal grinned. The tension eased just a little. They sat together, the sound of rain filling the pauses. Malcolm noticed how Layla watched everything. The door, the window, Jamal, even him. Nina, on the other hand, leaned into warmth, sipping slowly, blinking like she might fall asleep right there. "Your dad's coming?" Malcolm asked, keeping his tone light. "Yes," Layla said quickly. "He's busy, but he'll come." Malcolm nodded, though something in her voice caught his attention. It wasn't doubt. It was urgency. The phone finally rang. Malcolm answered, stepping a few feet away. "This is Malcolm Reed." There was a brief pause on the other end. Then a voice he didn't recognize, calm and professional. "Mr. Reed, this is the Harrisonville School District. We've been trying to locate 2 students from a field trip this morning." Malcolm's stomach tightened. "I have them," he said slowly. "They're safe. They're with me." Another pause. Longer this time. Thank you, the voice said. We're contacting their parent now. Malcolm hung up and turned back toward the kitchen. Layla was watching him closely. Is something wrong? She asked. Malcolm forced a smile. No. Just making sure everyone's on the same page. Outside, the rain began to fall harder, as if punctuating the moment. And somewhere between that phone call and the look in Layla's eyes, Malcolm felt it, a quiet sense that this situation was bigger than a simple misunderstanding. Something was unfolding. He just didn't know yet how deeply it would reach into his life. Malcolm sat at the kitchen table, sipping his own coffee while watching the two girls slowly adjust to the warmth of his house. Layla was perched on a chair, legs swinging slightly, a small frown on her face as if she were calculating how long she could stay. Nina, the younger one, clutched her mug tightly, blowing gently on the hot chocolate to cool it before taking a tentative sip. The steam fogged her glasses and Malcolm felt a pang, so small, so vulnerable, yet it landed like a weight in his chest. I know this isn't ideal, Malcolm said gently, breaking the silence. You didn't mean to get lost, right? Layla shook her head. We tried to stay together, but it rained and everything got messy. Nina whispered, I got scared. You did the right thing by sticking with each other, Malcolm replied. That's smart. Very smart. He smiled, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. His thoughts were elsewhere, about his son, about work, about the mounting bills stacked neatly on the counter beside the phone. Somehow this day had just gotten a lot heavier. Jamal shuffled into the kitchen, still in his pajamas, rubbing his eyes. Who are they, Dad? Malcolm took a breath, letting it out slowly. They're guests for now. Some kids who got caught in the rain. That's all. Jamal tilted his head. Can they stay for breakfast? Malcolm smiled genuinely this time. Yeah, they can stay for breakfast. As the girls ate, Malcolm tried to keep the conversation light, asking about school, favorite subjects, and cartoons. Layla had a cautious way of answering, precise and careful, while Nina would whisper something soft and then look down, trying to disappear. Malcolm noticed every detail, the way Nina's hand trembled when she lifted the cup, the way Layla kept glancing at the window every few minutes as if waiting for someone. It was then Malcolm realized just how small they were in the world. 8 years old. Lost. What? Hungry. And here he was, a man juggling so many responsibilities already, adding these strangers to the mix. And yet, he couldn't bring himself to turn them away. Do your parents know you're safe? Malcolm asked carefully. Layla hesitated. They're coming, but they're busy. Really busy. Malcolm nodded slowly, sensing the weight behind her words. She wasn't just talking about work or errands. There was an urgency there, a subtle tension that made him wary. After breakfast, Malcolm led the girls to the living room. He had a stack of board games and some coloring books he'd kept for Jamal's rainy days. He set them down on the rug. Pick whatever you want. I'm going to make a quick call to the school, okay? The girls nodded, though they didn't speak. Their small fingers traced the edges of the books, picking up crayons hesitantly. Malcolm grabbed his phone and dialed the school office again, leaving another message. Calm, steady. Not a hint of panic. When he hung up, he turned back toward them. Layla was staring out the window, rain streaking her hair. Nina was tracing a line on a coloring page, eyes downcast. Malcolm felt a mix of pride and worry. These girls had endured more today than most kids ever would, and he was the first adult who had really slowed down to listen. All right, he said, kneeling beside them. Here's the deal. You're safe here. You've got clothes to wear, food in your stomach, and someone to keep an eye on you. But I need you to promise me something. Layla raised an eyebrow. What? Promise me you'll stay together. No wandering off. You're a team, okay? Both girls nodded. Nina's nod was slow, deliberate. Layla's more determined, a small crease forming between her brows. Malcolm smiled faintly. Good. That's smart thinking. The sound of the rain outside was steady, almost hypnotic. It filled the silence between them, making the room feel cocooned, insulated from the rest of the world. But Malcolm couldn't shake a nagging sense, an intuition that this day was only the beginning. Something was coming, something that would test him in ways he hadn't imagined. He decided to distract them with a game. How about we play a round of Go Fish? Nina's face lit up slightly. Layla rolled her eyes playfully but didn't protest. Jamal sat cross-legged nearby, helping shuffle the cards. For a few moments, there was laughter, gentle teasing, and the kind of small, ordinary moments that Malcolm cherished in his chaotic life. But even as the laughter echoed through the room, Malcolm felt a prickle of unease. The girls' parents were supposed to arrive soon, and yet there was a delay. He tried not to dwell on it, but every parent-teacher phone call he had made today had ended with uncertainty. And just as he handed a card to Nina, the phone rang. Malcolm froze for a fraction of a second. He picked it up. The voice on the other end was calm but urgent, professional. Mr. Reed? This is the Harrisonville School District. We've been trying to reach you regarding 2 students from the field trip. Malcolm swallowed hard, trying to steady his voice. I have them. They're safe. They're here with me. Thank you, the voice said. We're contacting their parent now. They'll be there shortly. Malcolm hung up and looked at the girls. Their small faces were filled with relief, but also an unspoken tension, like they were expecting storms beyond just the rain outside. He exhaled, running a hand over his face. Okay, he said softly. We're almost at the next part. Don't worry. Everything's going to be fine. And yet, even as he said it, Malcolm couldn't shake the feeling that today's events were only the first layer of a story far bigger than a rainy morning in Harrisonville. Something unexpected was about to arrive, and nothing, absolutely nothing, was going to prepare him for it. By the time the knock came at the door, Malcolm's heart had already picked up pace. And just like that, his quiet morning had shifted, and he knew nothing would ever be the same. The knock at the door was firm, deliberate, and somehow carried an authority that made Malcolm pause mid-step. He exchanged a quick glance with the girls. Layla stiffened, and Nina's grip on her mug tightened. Even Jamal froze, sensing the tension in the air. Malcolm stepped forward and opened the door slowly. Standing there was a man in his early 40s, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed neatly in a dark coat that was damp from the rain. His presence had a quiet authority, the kind of presence that didn't need to raise a voice to command attention. He held an umbrella in one hand, the other tucked casually at his side, but it was his eyes that immediately made Malcolm pause, sharp, observant, measuring. Mr. Reed? The man asked. His voice was calm, controlled, precise. That's me, Malcolm said, trying to keep his tone steady. And you must be? He trailed off, unsure. I'm Henry Caldwell. I'm their father. He gestured toward the twins, who had cautiously moved behind Malcolm. I was notified by the school that my daughters had been delayed. Malcolm nodded and stepped aside, gesturing for him to enter. Come on in. They're just warming up from the rain. The girls immediately ran toward Caldwell, their relief palpable. Daddy! Layla cried, throwing her arms around him. Nina clung to her sister's leg before being scooped into Caldwell's embrace. The younger girl buried her face in his coat, muffling her little sobs. Malcolm watched, feeling an unfamiliar pang in his chest, a mix of admiration, longing, and a strange tension he couldn't quite place. These were kids he'd just met, yet the bond they shared with their father was instantaneous, undeniable. Caldwell set the girls down and looked toward Malcolm, his gaze sharp but not unkind. Thank you for keeping them safe. I know this was unexpected. Malcolm nodded. No problem. Kids are kids. You can't just leave them out in the rain. He smiled faintly, though inside he felt the first tremor of unease. There was something about Caldwell, something Malcolm couldn't quite put his finger on, that made him suddenly aware of every small detail about his own house, himself, his son. Jamal, sensing the formality in the room, tugged at Malcolm's sleeve. Dad, are they staying? Malcolm crouched to his son's level. Not for long, buddy. Just until their dad gets them settled. Caldwell crouched slightly as well, meeting Jamal's gaze. Thanks for looking out for them. I know it wasn't your responsibility, but you stepped up anyway. That says a lot about you, Mr. Reed. Malcolm felt his stomach twist. Praise from a stranger usually wouldn't matter, but something in Caldwell's tone, measured, calm with an edge of judgment, hit him differently. This was no casual acknowledgement. This was the kind of appraisal that felt heavy, the kind that weighed on a person's very choices. As Caldwell helped the girls dry their hair with towels Malcolm had set aside, Malcolm noticed a small folder that had fallen from Layla's backpack the night before, now resting on the counter. Something about it made his chest tighten. He glanced at Caldwell, who seemed to notice him looking. There was a flicker in his eyes, brief, subtle, almost imperceptible, but it sent Malcolm's thoughts spiraling. "You keep your house organized," Caldwell said casually, as if reading Malcolm's mind. "It's a good sign." Malcolm smiled politely, trying to mask the unease creeping through his chest. "Thanks. I try." There was a brief pause. Caldwell looked at the twins, then back at Malcolm. "I know today has been a bit chaotic. I hope they haven't caused you too much trouble." Malcolm shook his head. "No trouble at all. It's been an eventful morning, that's all." Caldwell nodded, his expression unreadable. Then finally he straightened. "I think it's time we head home, girls. You're safe now, and we need to make sure you're warm and dry." Layla hesitated for a moment, glancing at Malcolm with something in her eyes that he couldn't quite decipher. Gratitude? Sadness? A quiet acknowledgement that even for a short while, he had become someone important in their world. Nina followed her sister's lead, clutching Caldwell's hand tightly. As they left, Caldwell turned back to Malcolm, his gaze steady. "You did well today, Mr. Reed. Remember that." Malcolm nodded, watching as the family disappeared into the rain-soaked streets. A strange emptiness settled in the house, but it was mixed with an odd sense of anticipation. Something told him that this encounter wasn't just a simple reunion between father and daughters. As he closed the door, Malcolm's eyes fell on the small folder left on the counter. He picked it up, flipping it open almost instinctively. Inside were school forms, emergency contacts, and a legal notice. His heart skipped a beat. For a moment, Malcolm couldn't breathe. The folder contained documents he recognized, documents related to a custody review he hadn't been fully aware of. And then it clicked. The man who had just left, Henry Caldwell, was the judge overseeing his case. Malcolm sank into a chair, staring at the folder, the words swimming in front of him. He had sheltered the daughters of the very man who could now decide his son's fate. And just like that, everything changed. The rain outside continued its relentless tapping, but inside, Malcolm felt the weight of a storm he couldn't escape. Malcolm sat in his kitchen, the folder open in front of him, but he couldn't focus on the words. His hands felt heavy, his mind racing. Henry Caldwell, the judge, the father of the girls he had just sheltered, was now a figure of looming authority in his life, though he hadn't even known it before today. The thought made his chest tighten. He ran a hand through his hair, trying to steady himself. It wasn't that he hadn't faced challenges before. He had, but this was different. This was someone who could make decisions about Jamal's future with a simple signature or ruling. And now, Malcolm had unknowingly interacted with the family of that person, had shown kindness, nurtured and protected two children whose father might already be forming opinions about him. Opinions that could sway the scales in court. Jamal shuffled into the kitchen, rubbing his eyes. "Dad, you okay?" Malcolm forced a smile. "Yeah, buddy. Just thinking." Jamal tilted his head. "Are they gonna come back?" Malcolm hesitated. "Not today. But soon enough." He wanted to reassure his son, but the truth was heavier than he could put into words. He wasn't sure what soon enough meant anymore. After a long moment, Malcolm stood and poured himself another cup of coffee. He wandered over to the living room window, watching the rain streak down the glass. It blurred the world outside, turning familiar streets and houses into streaks of gray and green. There was a quiet beauty in it, but it couldn't mask the unease pressing in on him. His mind drifted to the girls. Layla and Nina had seemed so small, so fragile, yet their resilience had struck him. The way they clung to each other, the way Layla had taken charge in subtle ways, protecting her sister without even realizing it, it was a kind of courage Malcolm recognized. It reminded him of Jamal, reminded him of the lessons he tried to instill every day about responsibility, patience, and compassion. He sat down on the couch, folder in hand, and ran through the morning again in his head. How easily the girls had trusted him, even in a moment of fear. How careful he had been not to alarm them further. How naturally he had assumed responsibility like it was instinct. And yet, the more he thought about it, the more he realized something. It wasn't just instinct. It was hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, doing the right thing, even when no one was watching, could have meaning. That his choices, small and seemingly inconsequential, could ripple further than he imagined. The sound of Jamal's small footsteps brought him back. His son sat beside him, resting his head on Malcolm's shoulder. "Do you think they liked it here?" he asked softly. "I think they did," Malcolm replied, wrapping an arm around him. "They felt safe." Jamal nodded. "I liked having them here too. Even if just for a little bit." Malcolm smiled faintly. "Yeah, me too." For a few moments they sat in silence, listening to the rain. It was peaceful, almost comforting. But Malcolm couldn't shake the thought of Caldwell. The judge. The power he held over Malcolm's life. Every instinct told Malcolm to prepare, to brace himself, to anticipate what would come next. And deep down he knew it wasn't just about him. It was about Jamal. About the example he wanted to set. About the life he was trying to protect against forces he had no control over. Malcolm glanced back at the folder. He had to deal with it sooner or later. But for now he let the weight settle, let himself breathe just a little. Then his phone buzzed. A message from the school popped up, short, urgent, and unsettling. "Parent on the way. ED, 20 minutes. Malcolm's chest tightened. He wasn't ready. Not yet. He stood, ran a hand over his face, and muttered under his breath, "Here we go." Outside, the rain continued, relentless. But inside, a storm was already brewing, one Malcolm couldn't see fully yet. One that would change everything he thought he knew about kindness, trust, and the fragile balance of life. And when the knock finally came at the door, Malcolm knew his life was about to shift in ways he couldn't have prepared for. Malcolm's hand hovered over the doorknob. He could hear the rain hammering on the roof, like it was keeping time with the racing of his heart. Jamal peeked around his father's leg, wide-eyed. "Dad, who is it?" he whispered. Malcolm swallowed. "Someone important, buddy. Just stay calm." He pulled the door open, and there stood Henry Caldwell again, the man whose presence carried authority like gravity. He looked different up close, softer somehow, more human, but still commanding. Malcolm noticed the subtle lines around Caldwell's eyes, the kind that only came from responsibility, worry, and years of seeing the consequences of other people's choices. "Mr. Reed," Caldwell said. His voice was steady, measured. "I wanted to thank you again for looking after the girls this morning." Malcolm nodded. "No problem. Kids were cold, wet. I didn't have much choice, really." Caldwell gave a small smile, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. It takes someone patient and responsible to handle children in such a situation. "I've seen people panic. You didn't." Malcolm felt a tight knot form in his chest. That tone, the praise laced with judgment, it was familiar, though he didn't know why at first. Then it hit him. Caldwell wasn't just the girl's father. He was the judge handling his custody case. Every word carried weight now, more than he had realized. Jamal shuffled closer. "Dad, can they stay for lunch?" he asked innocently. Malcolm glanced at Caldwell, uncertain. Caldwell's gaze flicked toward the twins. Layla and Nina exchanged a quick, nervous glance. "Lunch is fine," Caldwell said finally, his voice neutral but polite. "I'll only stay a few minutes to make sure they're settled. Thank you again, Mr. Reed." Inside the house, the girls' energy seemed to shift. Layla perched on the couch, fidgeting slightly, while Nina clutched her hot chocolate cup like a lifeline. The warmth of the kitchen, the smell of the food Malcolm had just reheated, and the quiet hum of the refrigerator made the room feel safe, temporary but real. Malcolm served plates of scrambled eggs and toast, careful to keep the girls' portions generous. "Eat up," he said. "You've got a long day ahead once your dad takes you home." Layla looked at him, a small crease forming between her brows. "Thank you," she whispered, almost to herself. Malcolm nodded. "You're welcome. But remember, stay with each other, okay? Always." Jamal laughed quietly. "He's like a mini bodyguard, huh?" Malcolm chuckled. "Something like that." There was a brief lull, filled only by the sound of forks tapping plates and rain pattering against the window. Then Caldwell spoke again, his voice lower this time, more deliberate. "Mr. Reed, I hope you don't mind my asking, but you're Jamal's father, correct?" "Yes," Malcolm said cautiously. "I see how you handle him. Impressive. And not easy. Raising a child alone is never easy." Caldwell's eyes lingered on Malcolm for a moment longer. "Especially when life doesn't give you many breaks." Malcolm felt his throat tighten. He forced a casual shrug. "You do what you have to. Kids, they depend on you. That's all." The twins listened wide-eyed, though they didn't interrupt. Malcolm noticed Nina peek up at her sister, like she wanted reassurance. Layla gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Caldwell shifted, glancing toward the folder Malcolm had left on the counter, the one that contained documents about his custody case. Malcolm's stomach sank. He hadn't touched it, hadn't wanted to acknowledge it in front of Caldwell yet. But the subtle way Caldwell's gaze flicked toward it told Malcolm that nothing today was incidental. Caldwell straightened, giving Malcolm a polite nod. "Well, I should get the girls home. But it was good to meet you, truly." The twins clung to Caldwell for a moment longer, then started gathering their small backpacks. Malcolm followed, silently observing the interaction. The ease with which Caldwell handled the girls, the balance of authority and warmth, it was impressive. Malcolm felt a flicker of doubt mixed with admiration. As Caldwell reached the door, he paused and looked at Malcolm one last time. "You did well today. Don't forget that." Malcolm nodded, a lump forming in his throat. "Thanks," he managed to say. Once the door closed, the house felt impossibly quiet. Jamal let out a soft breath. "Dad, are they okay?" "They're fine," Malcolm said, setting the folder back on the counter, careful not to touch it too heavily. "For now. But," he paused, staring out the window at the rain, "things are going to get more complicated. I just don't know when." He sank into the chair, leaning back, letting his mind race. The girls had left, yes, but the encounter had planted a seed of unease. Caldwell's words, his presence, the weight of authority, it all pressed on Malcolm like the storm outside, relentless and unyielding. And somewhere deep inside, Malcolm knew this was only the beginning. The storm outside hadn't let up, and neither would the storm about to enter his life. The house didn't feel empty after they left. It felt watched. Malcolm noticed it most in the quiet moments, the way the refrigerator hummed a little louder, the way the rain seemed closer now, louder against the windows. He stood in the kitchen for a long time, staring at the spot where Henry Caldwell had been standing, replaying the man's words over and over in his head. "You did well today." It didn't sound like a compliment anymore. It sounded like an assessment. Malcolm shook his head and forced himself back into motion. Life didn't pause just because something unsettling had happened. He rinsed dishes, wiped the table, folded the towels the girls had used. Ordinary tasks. Grounding tasks. The kind that reminded him he was still just a man in a small house, doing his best. Jamal lingered nearby, unusually quiet. "Dad," he finally said, "that man, he talks like my principal." Malcolm almost laughed. "Almost?" "Yeah," he said instead. "Something like that." Jamal frowned. "Is that bad?" Malcolm dried his hands slowly. "No. Just different." Jamal accepted that, the way kids do when they sense answers are complicated. He wandered back to his room, leaving Malcolm alone with his thoughts. That was when the memories came. They always did when Malcolm tried to slow down. 2 years earlier, the hospital room had smelled like antiseptic and stale air. Letitia had looked impossibly small in the bed, her hand weak in his. The doctors had spoken carefully, choosing words like they were stepping through glass. Complications. Unexpected. Too late. Malcolm remembered nodding, pretending he understood, pretending he was ready. He hadn't been. After the funeral, everything had blurred together. Paperwork, condolences, casseroles dropped off by neighbors who didn't know what to say. Jamal clung to him constantly, afraid that if he let go, Malcolm might disappear too. Money had become a problem almost immediately. Letitia had handled most of the finances. She had been organized, methodical. Malcolm had learned fast or not at all. He took extra shifts at the warehouse. Nights turned into mornings. Sleep became optional. Some days he felt like he was always one mistake away from losing everything. It was around that time that Letitia's family started asking questions. At first they were gentle. Suggestions. Offers to help. Then concerns. Then meetings. Malcolm remembered sitting across from her sister in a cramped office, listening as she talked about stability and support and what was best for Jamal. Malcolm had stayed quiet. He had clenched his jaw and nodded and swallowed his pride. Because what do you say when someone implies, without ever saying it, that you might not be enough? The custody review hadn't come out of nowhere. But Malcolm hadn't expected it to feel so heavy, so official. Letters in the mail. Court dates mentioned casually like they were just another appointment. And now Henry Caldwell. The judge. The father. The man who had stood in Malcolm's living room and watched him interact with his son. Malcolm sat down at the kitchen table and opened the folder again. He read the document slowly this time, every word sinking in. Dates. Evaluations. Recommendations. Language that sounded neutral but felt sharp. He rubbed his face with both hands. Get it together, he muttered to himself. A knock sounded at the door. Malcolm froze. It wasn't loud. It wasn't urgent. Just a firm, steady knock. His heart jumped into his throat. For a split second, his mind raced through possibilities. School officials, social services, Caldwell again. He stood, walked to the door and opened it. Mrs. Dalton from next door stood there, holding a plastic container. Hey, Malcolm, she said warmly. I saw the extra little shoes by your door earlier. Everything okay? Malcolm exhaled, relief washing over him. Yeah, just some kids caught in the rain. She nodded, clearly not buying the simplicity of that explanation but kind enough not to press. I made soup. Thought you and Jamal might want some. Thank you, Malcolm said sincerely. That means a lot. As he closed the door, he realized how tightly wounded he'd been. How close to the edge. Later that night, after Jamal was asleep, Malcolm sat alone in the living room. The rain had slowed to a drizzle. The clock ticked loudly on the wall. He thought about Layla's careful eyes. Nina's quiet grip on her mug. The way Caldwell had watched everything without saying much at all. This wasn't just about custody anymore. This was about perception. About who he appeared to be when he didn't know he was being observed. About whether doing the right thing quietly could still matter in a system that ran on paperwork and judgments. Malcolm leaned back and stared at the ceiling. Whatever came next, he knew one thing for certain. The test had already begun. And he had no idea how many people were watching. Malcolm woke to another gray morning, the kind of gray that made even the most ordinary chores feel heavier. The rain had stopped overnight, but the sky still hung low, threatening more storms. He rubbed his eyes and forced himself out of bed, already thinking about the day ahead. Work at the warehouse. Bills to pay. Jamal's homework. And now, the custody case looming over him like a shadow he couldn't shake. Breakfast was quiet. Jamal poked at his eggs without enthusiasm. Dad, he said finally, do you think those girls are okay? Malcolm paused, a forkful of eggs halfway to his mouth. Yeah, he said carefully. They're safe with their dad. Jamal didn't ask who their dad was. He didn't need to. He trusted Malcolm to handle the grown-up problems, the ones that made his father tense even on sunny mornings. Malcolm finished his coffee in silence and glanced at the folder lying on the counter. He had left it untouched yesterday, but now it seemed unavoidable. The documents within contained more than just court dates and evaluations. They held the potential to define Jamal's future. And somewhere in that folder was the reminder that the man he had just helped in his home was the very judge who could sway the decision. He shook his head and put on his jacket. There was no use lingering on fear. He needed to work. He needed to keep moving. The drive to the warehouse was familiar but heavy. The town streets were slick from last night's drizzle. Malcolm's thoughts kept drifting back to Layla and Nina. He could picture them huddled under the awning, shivering, their small fingers clinging to each other. He had seen that fear in children before, not his own, not Jamal's, but there was something about it that stayed with you. Something that burrows into your chest and refuses to leave. He parked, clocked in, and stepped inside. The warehouse smelled of oil, cardboard, and the faint metallic tang of machinery. The morning shift hummed to life around him, colleagues greeting each other in half-words and nods. Malcolm slipped into his routine, lifting, moving, organizing, but his mind was elsewhere. He couldn't shake the look in Layla's eyes as she glanced at Caldwell, then back at him that morning. That small, almost imperceptible nod she gave when she decided to trust him. That had been real. And now it felt dangerous. During his lunch break he stepped outside. The rain had cleared, leaving the streets slick and shiny under the weak sun. Malcolm walked to the small park near the warehouse, pulling his coat tighter. Jamal would have loved it here. The swings, the slides, the puddles. A small, ordinary world where everything made sense. He pulled out his phone and checked for messages. Nothing new from the school. Nothing from Caldwell. Just the ticking clock and a mounting sense of anticipation. Later that afternoon, as he carried a heavy pallet across the warehouse floor, he thought about the responsibility he had just assumed this morning. Protecting 2 lost children. Keeping them safe. Comforting them. It had required patience he didn't even know he possessed. And now, knowing who Caldwell was, it carried a weight he couldn't escape. By the time his shift ended, Malcolm's body was exhausted, but his mind refused rest. He drove home slowly, the empty streets reflecting in the rain-soaked pavement, a mirror of his own careful, measured steps through life. When he arrived, he found a small package on the doorstep. No return address. Just a note, important. Read carefully. Malcolm picked it up, opened it inside, and found a single page of legal writing. Recommendations, observations, notes. Nothing overtly threatening, but the tone was unmistakable, formal, evaluative, meticulous. Someone had been watching him, observing, assessing, and he knew exactly who. He set the paper down on the counter and exhaled, leaning against it. The weight of responsibility, the unseen eyes, and the ticking clock of his custody case pressed down harder than ever. Malcolm turned to the living room window and watched as a pair of small birds hopped along the wet lawn. Even they seemed cautious, wary of every movement. A reflection, perhaps, of his own life. Every step measured, every decision scrutinized, every action carrying consequences he couldn't fully predict. And deep down he understood that today had changed something. Not the girls. Not Jamal. Not him. But the invisible balance of power in his life. Someone had taken notice. And that notice would matter. A knock at the door startled him. Malcolm's hand hesitated on the knob. He already knew who it might be. And when he opened the door, he would find that the first layer of observation had just begun. Malcolm's fingers hovered over the doorknob, the envelope from earlier still clutched in his other hand. The knock came again, deliberate, patient, like someone who already knew he'd answer eventually. He braced himself and opened the door. It wasn't Caldwell this time. Instead, it was a young woman in a dark raincoat, her umbrella dripping onto the porch. She held a small clipboard against her chest, her expression serious but not unkind. "Mr. Reed?" she asked. "Yes," Malcolm replied cautiously. "Can I help you?" "My name is Elena Marks," she said. "I work with the Family Services office here in Harrisonville. I've been asked to follow up regarding some recent concerns about a custody review for your son Jamal." Malcolm's heart clenched. I wasn't expecting anyone today." "I understand," Elena said, glancing briefly at the envelope on the counter. "I just need to ask a few questions, make sure everything is on record." "It won't take long." Malcolm stepped aside and gestured for her to come in. Jamal peeked from behind the couch, curiosity and caution written across his small face. Elena moved carefully into the living room, setting her clipboard down on the coffee table. She began asking questions, routine, clinical sounding, but Malcolm felt the subtle pressure behind them. Questions about Jamal's daily schedule, his schooling, his emotional and social well-being. Questions about Malcolm himself, his job, his support system. Malcolm answered honestly, careful not to embellish but also not to reveal unnecessary details. He watched her expressions closely. Nothing overt, but there was a faint nod here, a slight raise of the eyebrow there, signs that she was assessing, recording, noting every nuance. Jamal tugged at Malcolm's sleeve. Dad, she's writing everything down. I know, buddy, Malcolm whispered, squeezing his shoulder. Just answer honestly. When the formal part of the questioning ended, Elena paused as if weighing whether to say more. Finally, she looked directly at Malcolm. Mr. Reed, it's clear you care for Jamal deeply, she said. You've done a lot to maintain stability and provide for him. But there's something you should be aware of. The judge overseeing your case, Henry Caldwell, has been observing these interactions as well. He's thorough, and he notices details most people miss. Malcolm froze. You mean, he knows I interacted with his daughters? Malcolm asked cautiously. Elena nodded slowly. Yes, that interaction has been noted. He's not only aware, you could say he's evaluating how you handle children in unplanned situations. That may factor into his judgment regarding Jamal. Malcolm felt a strange combination of dread and disbelief. So, helping them it could be seen in different ways, Elena said carefully. Kindness can be recognized as responsibility, or, depending on interpretation, as interference. Judges are humans too, and while they are professional, their perspective is informed by the behaviors they observe. Malcolm swallowed hard. The weight of the morning, the folder, the unexpected visits, they weren't random. Each action had meaning now, each choice carried consequences far beyond what he had imagined. He leaned back, closing his eyes briefly. I thought I was just helping. That's all. I didn't even know who they were. Elena offered a small, sympathetic smile. I know, but sometimes doing the right thing isn't simple, especially when lives and decisions are intertwined. Jamal tugged at his sleeve again. Dad, are we in trouble? Malcolm crouched down and looked his son in the eye. No, buddy. We're not in trouble. We just have to be careful. And that's okay. You and I? We're going to be okay. Elena gathered her clipboard. I'll leave you with a few forms to review. And Mr. Reed, remember, documentation and transparency are key. If there's ever anything you're unsure about, write it down. Be precise. Be honest. That's the best way to protect Jamal. Malcolm nodded. She stood, paused at the door, and added quietly, Judge Caldwell has a reputation for noticing even the smallest details. Every choice you make matters more than you realize. She left, the rain misting the porch again. Malcolm closed the door and leaned against it, feeling the room close in around him. The folder on the counter suddenly felt heavier, as if it contained the weight of every decision he had ever made. Jamal slid next to him on the couch. Dad, what do we do now? Malcolm rubbed his son's hair and sighed. We live. We keep steady. We keep calm. And we keep proving every single day that we can handle this. He stared out the window at the darkening streets, at the quiet houses, at the remnants of the morning storm. Somewhere out there, Caldwell was already forming opinions, drawing conclusions, weighing actions Malcolm had only begun to understand. And Malcolm knew this. The real test was only starting. The storm outside had passed, but inside, the one that mattered most was just beginning to rage. The next morning, Malcolm woke to a thin light filtering through the blinds, the kind of light that felt like it was holding its breath. The rain from yesterday had left the streets wet and shiny, puddles reflecting the sleepy morning sky. He brewed coffee in near silence, the kitchen filled only with the low hum of the coffee maker and the soft creaks of the house settling. Jamal sat at the table, spooning cereal into his mouth without much enthusiasm. Dad, do you think they'll notice if I'm tired today? He asked quietly. Malcolm looked at him, concern flickering. Who? The school. Judge Caldwell. Malcolm froze for a heartbeat, then forced a small smile. Buddy, we take one day at a time. You focus on being you. That's all anyone can ask. Jamal nodded, though Malcolm could see the worry still lingering in his son's eyes. After breakfast, Malcolm dropped Jamal off at school and drove to work, the quiet streets reflecting his own careful thoughts. The warehouse was busy but familiar, grounding him in the rhythm of lifting, stacking, and organizing. Still, his mind wandered constantly to the events of the past 2 days. The girls, Caldwell, Elena Marks, the folder on the counter. Every step he took in that warehouse felt like it was being measured, even though he knew no one was watching. During his lunch break, Malcolm stepped outside and leaned against the truck, pulling his jacket tighter. He thought about the twins again. Layla, careful, observant. Nina, quiet, gentle. And their father, the judge. Somehow they were all connected now, their lives brushing against his in a way that carried consequences he hadn't anticipated. When he returned home that evening, the house felt heavier than usual. Jamal had already finished his homework and was sprawled on the couch, flipping through a comic book. Malcolm noticed the mail sitting in the hallway. Among the usual bills and flyers was an official envelope, stamped with the Harrisonville court seal. His stomach tightened. He opened it slowly. Inside was a notice. A hearing date for his custody case had been officially set. The details were meticulous, formal, and cold. Every instruction was precise, every expectation clearly outlined. Malcolm felt the weight of it pressing down on him, heavier than the rain that had soaked the town the day he had helped the twins. He sank into the living room chair, folding the notice in his hands. Jamal crawled into his lap, sensing the tension but not fully understanding it. "Dad, what is it?" Malcolm held the envelope close to his chest. "It's a meeting. A court hearing. About us. About you." Jamal's small face tightened. "Is it bad?" Malcolm shook his head slowly. "Not bad, but serious. We have to be ready." The rest of the evening passed in a haze of planning and quiet reflection. Malcolm reviewed Jamal's schoolwork, talked gently about his day, and tried to maintain a calm exterior. But underneath, the storm of anxiety churned. He couldn't forget Caldwell's eyes, the way he had observed Malcolm interacting with the girls, the way he had measured every word, every gesture. As Malcolm tucked Jamal into bed that night, he felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders like never before. This wasn't just about providing or protecting or being a good parent. This was about demonstrating his worth under the gaze of a man who could decide his son's future with a single signature. After Jamal fell asleep, Malcolm sat at the kitchen table with the folder once again. He opened it carefully, reviewing the documents, the notes, the recommendations, and the subtle observations about his home, his routine, his parenting. Every word seemed scrutinized, every detail magnified. He leaned back in the chair, rubbing his temples. His life had always been challenging, filled with unexpected twists, loss, and the grind of responsibility. But now it felt as though every choice, every action, even the kindness he had shown to two lost children, had consequences beyond his control. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. Malcolm stared into the darkened streets, knowing that the real challenge, the one that would test him more than anything else in years, was only beginning. And deep down he realized something. The judge's gaze, Caldwell's quiet observation, the invisible weight of judgment, it had already started shaping the life of the man he thought he had been all along. Malcolm closed the folder slowly, letting out a long breath. Whatever came next, he had to be ready. Because nothing about this storm was simple. And just like that, the first ripple of tension before the hurricane had begun. Malcolm woke the next morning to the sound of birds cautiously pecking at the wet lawn outside. The storm from days before had passed, but the air still carried that heavy, electric weight, the kind that makes your chest tighten for no reason. He rubbed his eyes and poured a cup of coffee, the steam rising in lazy curls that felt almost calming, though his mind refused to settle. Jamal was already at the table, humming softly while finishing a bowl of cereal. "Dad," he said, glancing up, "do you think we'll, be okay at the hearing?" Malcolm sighed, running a hand over his tired face. "We will, buddy. We just need to show them what we already know, how much we care, how hard we try. That's what matters." Jamal nodded but didn't look convinced. Malcolm wanted to reassure him more, but words felt flimsy. Sometimes actions mattered more than anything you could say. After dropping Jamal off at school, Malcolm drove through the small town's slick streets, his mind buzzing with preparation. He stopped briefly at the small coffee shop he liked, the one where everyone knew him as the single dad with the quiet kid, and picked up a large cup. The barista, Mrs. Green, offered a sympathetic smile. "You look like you didn't sleep last night," she said softly. "Not really," Malcolm admitted. "Big day coming up." She nodded, handing him the cup. "You've got this. You've got your heart in the right place." Malcolm managed a small, grateful smile, though he knew her encouragement couldn't change what was coming. At the warehouse, the day passed in a blur of physical work, though his mind kept wandering back to Caldwell, the girls, and the court documents. Every box lifted, every pallet shifted, felt like a rehearsal for restraint and patience he would need in the courtroom. By mid-afternoon, Malcolm returned home to find a note slipped under his door. "Judge Caldwell would like a brief pre-hearing meeting tomorrow morning. He believes it may help both parties clarify some details." Malcolm stared at the paper. A meeting with Caldwell. Alone. Face to face. His stomach tightened. He could feel every pulse in his head, every drop of adrenaline threatening to overtake his thoughts. Part of him wanted to call and decline, to say no, this isn't necessary. But another, more rational part of him knew that avoiding it could only raise questions, suspicion, or worse, doubt about his capability as a parent. He spent the evening pacing, going over everything he wanted to say if he had the chance. How he would explain his daily routine with Jamal. How he would demonstrate the love, care, and consistency he poured into his son's life. Every word he rehearsed, every detail he imagined, added weight to his chest. Jamal watched silently, sensing the tension but unsure how to help. "Dad," he finally said, "you'll be okay. You always are." Malcolm forced a small laugh. "I hope you're right, buddy. I really do." That night, sleep was shallow, filled with dreams of judgment and scrutiny. In his dreams, Caldwell was everywhere, watching, observing, evaluating. Sometimes he was stern, sometimes approving, sometimes almost unreadable, like the calm before a storm that could hit without warning. When Malcolm awoke, the air was crisp and the light outside seemed brighter, almost deceptively calm. He made coffee, dressed in his best, and reviewed the folder one last time. Each note, each document, each subtle observation Caldwell might have made ran through his mind. Jamal stirred, eyes half open. "Dad, do you want me to come with you?" Malcolm shook his head, brushing his son's hair back. "No, buddy. This is my part. But I promise, I'll come back to you. And we'll be okay." He kissed Jamal's forehead, trying to mask the fear he felt. The drive to Caldwell's chambers was quiet, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. The streets of Harrisonville, small and familiar, now felt alien, every storefront a reminder that life could pivot in a single decision. Malcolm parked outside, took a deep breath, and stepped out. The courthouse loomed ahead, its gray stone facade heavy and unyielding. He adjusted his jacket, tucked the folder under his arm, and walked through the doors. Inside, the smell of polished wood, paper, and faint antiseptic greeted him. He made his way to the conference room Caldwell had requested. When he opened the door, Caldwell was already there, standing near the window watching the town streets below. "Mr. Reed," Caldwell said without turning, "thank you for coming. Please sit." Malcolm complied, hands gripping the folder. He swallowed hard, heart pounding in a rhythm he couldn't control. Caldwell finally turned, his gaze sharp, deliberate. "I've reviewed your file, but I wanted to meet you in person. There are things no document can convey, things that only come through observation and interaction." Malcolm nodded. "I understand, sir." Caldwell's eyes softened for a fraction of a second, just enough for Malcolm to sense a hint of humanity behind the stern authority. "I've also been aware of your actions earlier this week with my daughters. Helping them when they were lost, that speaks to something important. But I need to see the consistency, Mr. Reed. Consistency is what matters in parenting." Malcolm's throat tightened. He nodded again, words sticking. He realized then that everything, the small acts of care, the routines, the attention, the love, had finally led to this moment. Every choice mattered, every day counted. And deep down, he knew that how he handled the next hour could ripple across his son's life in ways he could neither predict nor undo. The silence stretched between them, heavy and anticipatory. Malcolm's palms sweated around the folder, his thoughts racing, but he forced himself to sit tall, ready for whatever Caldwell would ask next. Because nothing, no kindness, no diligence, no preparation, would matter if he faltered now. Malcolm sat across from Caldwell, the tension in the room pressing down like the gray stone walls of the courthouse surrounding them. The window behind Caldwell framed the quiet town streets outside, but inside the air was heavy as though every heartbeat was being counted. Malcolm's hands gripped the folder, and he could feel the slight tremor in his fingertips. Caldwell studied him for a long moment, eyes scanning Malcolm's face, searching for something he couldn't name. "Mr. Reed," he began, his voice calm but firm, "raising a child alone is complex. And I understand the challenges you've faced. I've reviewed the files, spoken with school officials, and observed your actions with my daughters. But paperwork and observations aren't the full picture. I need to know about your daily life, your routines, how you balance care, work, and stability." Malcolm swallowed, forcing a steadying breath. I try to keep things consistent. Jamal wakes up at 6, has breakfast, goes to school. I pick him up after my shift. We do homework, dinner, bedtime routines. Weekends are for errands or sometimes just time together. I make sure he's safe, supported, and never feels alone. Caldwell nodded slowly. "And your support network? Friends, family, neighbors?" Malcolm hesitated. He had friends, yes, but not family nearby. His sister lived 3 states away. Mrs. Dalton next door helped occasionally. The community had been kind, but he had mostly managed alone. "It's small, sir. But I do have people around to help if necessary. Mostly neighbors and close friends." Caldwell made a note on his clipboard but didn't speak immediately. Instead, he leaned back, observing Malcolm, weighing every word, every gesture, every pause. The silence stretched, a quiet pressure that made Malcolm's pulse race. "Mr. Reed," Caldwell said finally, "you helped my daughters during a difficult moment. That was commendable. But I have to ask, did you know who their father was at the time?" Malcolm's stomach tightened. "No, sir. I didn't. I only knew they were stranded and needed help. That's all I considered." Caldwell's gaze sharpened, and for a moment, Malcolm felt exposed under it. "And yet, Mr. Reed, you acted without hesitation, with care and thoughtfulness. That says a lot about your character. But character alone isn't enough. Stability, reliability, and long-term planning are equally important. How do you ensure those in your life?" Malcolm took a deep breath. He had rehearsed this conversation countless times in his head, but speaking it aloud carried weight he hadn't anticipated. "I plan. I schedule. I make sure Jamal has everything he needs: school, meals, medical care, routines. I work extra hours when necessary. I monitor his progress. I'm not perfect, sir. I make mistakes. But I learn from them and try to do better every day." Caldwell's face softened slightly, though his gaze remained piercing. "I can see that, Mr. Reed. And yet, you must understand that this meeting isn't about proving perfection. It's about demonstrating consistency and awareness. Actions speak louder than words. And that is what I've been observing." Malcolm nodded, swallowing hard. "I understand, sir. I just want what's best for Jamal. He's my life." Caldwell leaned forward, the light catching the edge of his glasses. "One last thing. You may not realize it, but how you handle unexpected situations, the way you responded to my daughters, may influence my assessment. It shows initiative, empathy, and calm under pressure. These qualities, they matter." Malcolm felt his chest tighten. Every act of kindness, every small decision he had made recently, now carried weight far beyond what he imagined. Helping the twins wasn't just a moral choice, it was a glimpse into the kind of parent he could be under observation. Caldwell stood, placing a hand on the back of Malcolm's chair. "Thank you for being honest, and thank you for your patience. The hearing will provide the opportunity to formalize these observations, but I wanted you to hear this directly. The consistency you show day to day, that is the foundation of what we consider in these cases." Malcolm nodded, his throat tight. "Thank you, sir." As he walked out of the courthouse, the gray streets of Harrisonville felt different. Not threatening but weighty. Every decision he made, every step he took with Jamal, every small act of kindness, would now be observed, measured, and assessed. He returned home and found Jamal waiting with a book in hand. "Dad, are we okay?" Malcolm sat beside him, ruffling his hair. "We're okay, buddy. We just have to keep being who we already are. That's enough. For the first time in days, Malcolm allowed himself a small, quiet breath. But deep inside, he knew this was only the beginning. The pre-hearing meeting had given him insight, yes, but it had also revealed the invisible pressure Caldwell's presence carried. And Malcolm understood, more clearly than ever, that nothing would ever be the same. Outside, the town seemed calm, almost ordinary. But Malcolm knew better now. Life, like the storm that had passed days before, had left behind traces, ripples he could not ignore and consequences he could not yet see. The real test, he realized, was not the meeting, nor the courthouse. It was every choice he would make moving forward. And somewhere in the quiet, unseen eyes were still watching. The next morning, Malcolm woke with a heaviness he couldn't shake. The sky outside was a pale gray, and even the birds' calls sounded cautious, hesitant. Breakfast was quiet. Jamal sat at the table, spooning cereal slowly, glancing up occasionally with small, worried eyes. "Dad, do you think today's going to be," Jamal hesitated, "important?" Malcolm smiled gently, forcing calm into his voice. "Every day is important, buddy. But today, we just focus on being steady, doing what we always do." Jamal nodded but didn't seem convinced. Malcolm finished his coffee in silence, the familiar aroma doing little to ease the tension coiling in his chest. By mid-morning, Malcolm drove Jamal to school, the streets still wet from the drizzle overnight. He parked a few blocks away and watched Jamal disappear into the building, backpack bouncing, small but steady. Every step Jamal took felt like a reminder of what Malcolm was fighting to protect. Once he returned home, Malcolm sat at the kitchen table, folder open, reviewing every detail again. Notes, forms, schedules, documents, recommendations, all meticulously prepared for the upcoming hearing. He knew that every tiny oversight could be magnified under Caldwell's watchful eye. A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. He opened it to find Layla and Nina standing there, umbrellas dripping and cheeks flushed from the cold. "Mr. Reed," Layla exclaimed. "We wanted to thank you again for everything the other day." Malcolm blinked. "You didn't need to come back." Nina stepped forward shyly. "We just wanted to make sure you know we're okay. And we didn't get to say goodbye properly." Malcolm felt his chest tighten. The girl's presence reminded him of the storm of events that had begun when he had offered simple kindness. He crouched down to their level. "I appreciate that. You're both doing the right thing by going home. That's all I care about." Layla's eyes lingered on him. "You're a good dad, really?" Malcolm forced a small laugh, masking the lump in his throat. "Thanks, kiddo. That means a lot." After they left, Malcolm felt a strange mix of relief and unease. Their visit, though innocent, was another reminder that his actions had consequences beyond what he could control. Every interaction with them was now part of a larger web, and Caldwell's influence hovered silently over it all. He spent the rest of the morning organizing his notes, making sure every document was in order, every record accessible. He rehearsed potential questions Caldwell or his lawyers might ask during the hearing, trying to anticipate every scenario. By early afternoon, Malcolm felt the tension settling into his shoulders like a physical weight. He decided to take a short walk to clear his mind, wandering down the quiet streets of Harrisonville. The town seemed ordinary, but to Malcolm, every corner carried subtle reminders of unpredictability, neighbors' glances, puddles reflecting the gray sky, the way the wind shifted unexpectedly. He returned home to find Jamal doing homework at the kitchen table, quiet but focused. Malcolm smiled faintly. "Keep it up, buddy. You're doing great." Jamal looked up. "I hope Dad does okay today." Malcolm ruffled his hair. "I will, Jamal. We'll get through this together." As evening fell, Malcolm reviewed the folder one last time, notes neatly stacked, documents in order. Outside, the last light of the day faded, leaving the house in a quiet gloom. He sat back, closing his eyes briefly, bracing for what tomorrow would bring. Somewhere in the quiet, he could almost feel Caldwell's presence, a silent observer of everything Malcolm had done and would continue to do. The pre-hearing meetings, the interactions, the choices, it was all part of a larger evaluation. And Malcolm knew the real challenge was about to arrive. He exhaled slowly. The calm before the storm had ended. Now came the moment of reckoning. The morning of the hearing arrived too quietly. No storm. No dramatic sunrise. Just a pale sky and a stillness that felt deliberate, almost mocking. Malcolm dressed carefully, choosing the cleanest shirt he owned, smoothing wrinkles he knew would reappear the moment he sat down. His hands moved on habit alone. His mind was already miles ahead. Jamal sat on the edge of his bed, shoes dangling from his fingers. "Do I have to go to school today?" he asked. Malcolm hesitated. "Yeah. Mrs. Keller's expecting you. I'll pick you up after." Jamal nodded, then paused. "Dad, what if they don't think you're good enough?" The question landed harder than anything Malcolm had heard in weeks. He crouched in front of his son, steadying his voice. "Listen to me. Grown-ups talk a lot. They analyze things. But none of that changes who we are. No matter what happens today, I'm your dad. That doesn't change." Jamal searched his face, then leaned forward and hugged him tightly. "Okay." After dropping Jamal off, Malcolm sat in the car for a long moment before driving away. His reflection stared back at him in the rearview mirror, tired, determined, scared in a way he didn't allow himself to show often. The courthouse parking lot was nearly full when he arrived. People moved in and out with folders, briefcases, quiet urgency. Malcolm locked his car and stood still for a second, grounding himself. Then he walked in. Inside, the air felt colder than usual. The polished floors reflected fluorescent lights that made everything feel exposed. He checked in, sat on a wooden bench, and waited. Across the room, a woman he recognized from prior filings sat with a man Malcolm assumed was her attorney. She avoided eye contact. Then the doors at the far end opened. Judge Henry Caldwell entered, robe flowing slightly as he walked. He didn't look at Malcolm right away. When he did, it was brief, unreadable. No nod. No acknowledgement. Just observation. The hearing began. Voices echoed softly in the chamber. Statements were made. Records referenced. Malcolm answered questions when directed to, keeping his voice steady, his posture calm. He talked about Jamal's routine. School. Meals. Evenings spent reading or fixing small things around the house together. He didn't exaggerate. He didn't defend himself unless asked. Caldwell listened without interruption. Occasionally he wrote something down. At one point, an attorney referenced recent community interactions. Malcolm's chest tightened. He felt it coming before it arrived. "Mr. Reed," Caldwell said, finally looking directly at him, "you were involved in an incident earlier this month involving 2 minors found unsupervised. Can you describe your actions?" Malcolm inhaled slowly. "I found 2 young girls stranded in the rain. I stayed with them, contacted help, and ensured they were safe until their parent arrived." "And why did you choose to intervene?" Caldwell asked. "Because they were children," Malcolm replied. "And they needed help." There was a pause. Long enough for Malcolm to feel every heartbeat in his ears. Caldwell looked down at his notes, then back up. "Were you aware at the time who their parent was?" "No, Your Honor." Another pause. Caldwell leaned back slightly. "Thank you." The hearing continued. It felt endless, yet somehow rushed. When it ended, Caldwell announced that a decision would not be made immediately. Further consideration was required. Malcolm nodded, thanked the court, and walked out on legs that felt oddly hollow. In the hallway, voices blurred together. Doors closed. Papers shuffled. Life continued, indifferent to the weight sitting on his chest. Outside, the sky had darkened. He sat in his car, hands resting on the steering wheel, unsure how long he stayed there. Relief hadn't come. Neither had fear. Just suspension. His phone buzzed. A message from the school. Jamal was waiting. Malcolm started the engine. As he pulled out of the lot, he caught sight of Caldwell through the courthouse doors, standing still, watching the parking lot like he was waiting for something. Or someone. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second through glass and distance. Then Caldwell turned away. And Malcolm realized the hearing wasn't the end. It was only the surface. Malcolm drove through the quiet streets, Jamal chattering softly in the back seat about his day at school, but Malcolm barely heard a word. His mind was still replaying the courtroom, Caldwell's measured words, the brief pauses that seemed to weigh more than any statement he had made. Every syllable, every glance, every subtle nod had felt like a test, and he wasn't sure he had passed. At home, the house felt unusually silent. Jamal had disappeared upstairs to his room, and Malcolm sat at the kitchen table, folder open again, flipping through notes. He tried to analyze every moment, every detail of the hearing. What had Caldwell noticed? What had he missed? He rubbed his temples. The girl's visit, the pre-hearing conversation, the actual hearing, it all seemed connected, like a puzzle he hadn't yet fully understood. Helping Layla and Nina had been instinct, pure instinct. Yet now he realized it might carry more weight than he ever imagined. Not just moral weight, but practical, legal significance. A knock at the door broke his concentration. He froze for a moment, then walked cautiously to the door. It was Elena Marks, holding her clipboard again. Her expression was serious, though not unkind. "Mr. Reed," she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "I wanted to touch base about the hearing and a few follow-up items." Malcolm motioned to the kitchen table. "Of course. Please sit." Elena laid the clipboard down, tapping a pen against it thoughtfully. "First, let me say that Judge Caldwell has noted your interactions with the girls. Your handling of that situation reflects positively on your ability to respond to unexpected challenges, which is significant." Malcolm's chest tightened. "Significant? In what way?" Elena paused. "It shows initiative, empathy, and calm under pressure. But, Mr. Reed, it also raises a point we need to discuss. He wants to ensure that your interactions are consistent with your daily parenting practices, not just isolated incidents. Essentially, he's asking for continuity." Malcolm nodded slowly. "So, what I did for them matters because it reflects on Jamal?" Elena gave a small nod. "Yes. He is assessing the broader picture. How you respond to one situation informs his understanding of your capacity to parent consistently." Malcolm leaned back, absorbing the weight of her words. Every decision he made, every interaction he had, could now be interpreted as evidence of his character and capability. Even kindness carried responsibility. Elena shifted slightly. "Additionally, there's a procedural matter. The court has requested that you provide a more detailed daily log for Jamal. Meals, routines, schoolwork, extracurricular activities. It's not punitive, just thorough." Malcolm exhaled slowly. "I understand. I'll do it." Elena hesitated, then added quietly, "Mr. Reed, Judge Caldwell notices details others might overlook. Every act, every choice, even seemingly small ones, they all matter." After she left, Malcolm sank into the chair, staring at the folder on the table. He thought of Jamal upstairs, of the girls, of Caldwell's silent observation. Life had shifted. The ordinary small-town rhythm he had relied upon was now layered with scrutiny, with stakes higher than he had ever faced before. He knew one thing: the coming days would require every ounce of patience, courage, and consistency he could muster. And he also knew that Caldwell's watchful eyes were not just in the courtroom, they were everywhere, in every choice, in every act of care. Malcolm picked up a pen and began drafting Jamal's daily log, line by line, minute by minute. The responsibility weighed heavily, but for the first time he also felt a spark of clarity. His actions, his consistency, and his care for Jamal were no longer abstract. They were tangible, measurable, and potentially transformative. Outside, the town seemed calm, almost indifferent. But Malcolm knew better. Every choice now mattered in ways he couldn't yet see. And as he wrote, he silently vowed, no matter the scrutiny, no matter the judgment, he would prove, through every small act, that he was the father Jamal deserved. The quiet of the evening deepened. Somewhere, unseen, the threads of observation continued to weave, connecting past kindnesses, present diligence, and the uncertain future that waited just beyond the horizon. The morning sun broke through thin clouds, painting the quiet streets of Harrisonville in muted gold. Malcolm sipped his coffee slowly, watching Jamal eat breakfast, noticing how the boy had developed a careful rhythm, checking the clock, spooning cereal, glancing up at him occasionally with that small, steady trust that Malcolm cherished. Today felt heavier than usual. Not because of what the town could see, but because of what Malcolm knew was waiting in the coming hours. The next step of the custody review required him to bring Jamal to the courthouse. Not the hearing itself, but a supervised observation session. Caldwell wanted to see the father and son dynamic firsthand, outside of documents, forms, and testimony. Jamal noticed Malcolm's tense expression. "Dad, are you nervous?" Malcolm forced a small smile. "Just a little, buddy. But that's okay. A little nerves means you care. Let's just be ourselves." At the courthouse, the waiting area smelled of polished wood and faint antiseptic. Malcolm signed in and sat with Jamal beside him, holding the folder on his lap. He flipped through the notes, double-checking routines, schoolwork, and schedules, knowing Caldwell would observe everything, even the smallest gestures. A court officer led them to a small observation room. Through a one-way mirror, Malcolm could see Caldwell sitting at a table across the hallway, his gaze seemingly calm but intensely focused. "Remember, Jamal," Malcolm whispered, "just do what we always do. Read, draw, play a little, be yourself." The boy nodded, eyes wide but trusting. Malcolm guided him to a small table with paper and pencils, then took a chair nearby, observing quietly. The minutes stretched, slow and deliberate. Caldwell made notes, occasionally glancing at them through the mirror. Malcolm found himself tense, aware of every movement, every glance, every way Jamal's small hands moved the pencil. He couldn't fidget. He couldn't relax. Every moment was measured, observed. Then Caldwell leaned back and Malcolm felt a flicker of acknowledgement. Not approval. Not judgment. Just observation. An hour passed. Jamal grew restless and started humming softly, tapping the pencil against the table. Malcolm smiled, nudged him gently and said, "Keep going, buddy. You're doing great." Caldwell scribbled a few more notes and then stood, moving out of view. Malcolm exhaled slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. He glanced at Jamal, who was smiling now, absorbed in drawing. On the drive home, Malcolm's mind raced. The observation had gone as smoothly as possible, yet he couldn't shake the feeling of scrutiny. Caldwell had seen more than just routines. He had seen their connection, their unspoken trust, their small moments of patience and understanding. At home, Malcolm tucked Jamal in early, sensing the boy's need for security after a long, unusual day. "You did really well today," he whispered, brushing Jamal's hair back. "I'm proud of you." Jamal mumbled sleepily, "I know, Dad. We'll be okay." Malcolm closed the door and leaned against it, exhaling heavily. Observation or not, he knew this was just one piece of a much larger puzzle. Caldwell's scrutiny wasn't limited to the courthouse. Every choice, every action, every moment of care, intentional or instinctive, would now carry weight. He turned back to the folder, pulling it close. As he reviewed the notes, the observation details, and his own reflections, he realized that this process wasn't just testing him as a father, it was testing the essence of who he was, how he thought, and how he acted under pressure. Outside, the streets of Harrisonville glimmered faintly in the evening light. The town seemed calm, but Malcolm knew better. Every ripple of kindness, every careful decision, every measured moment could influence the course of his life, and Jamal's. And deep inside, he felt a quiet determination. He would continue. Every single day. No hesitation. No second guessing. No matter how closely watched, he would be the father Jamal needed. Because now, more than ever, the stakes were real. And every small choice mattered. The morning started with a familiar rhythm, but Malcolm felt its weight more acutely than ever. Jamal was already dressed, backpack slung over his small shoulders, and eating breakfast faster than usual. Malcolm tried to focus on the smell of the toast, the warmth of the coffee, the ordinary sounds of the house. But everything felt heightened, like life had been magnified under a lens. "Dad, do you think today is going to be another observation thing?" Jamal asked quietly, staring at his spoon. Malcolm shook his head gently. "No, buddy. Today's just a normal day. But remember what we practiced. Be ourselves, stay steady, and focus on what matters. Reading, homework, talking, and caring for each other." Jamal nodded, though Malcolm could see the tension lingering in his small features. After dropping Jamal off at school, Malcolm drove slowly, thinking about Caldwell's presence in their lives. The judge's influence wasn't just in court or during observations. It had infiltrated every decision, every interaction, every choice Malcolm had made since that day with the twins. It was subtle, quiet, but undeniable. At work, Malcolm threw himself into the physicality of the warehouse. Boxes shifted, pallets stacked, forklifts roared, but none of it could drown out the mental hum of Caldwell's scrutiny. Every decision he made, even minor ones, felt like a rehearsal for judgment, every small act of diligence a test of consistency. During lunch, he walked outside to clear his mind. The drizzle from the previous night had left the streets slick, reflecting streetlights that had not yet faded. He noticed neighbors stepping out, kids playing cautiously in puddles, and for a brief moment, it felt almost normal, almost ordinary. Returning home that evening, Malcolm found a small package on the doorstep. No return address. Just his name written neatly on the front. Inside was a small notebook, pages blank, with a note tucked inside. Record everything. Even the small things matter. Malcolm's chest tightened. Every interaction now carried weight. Every meal prepared, every bedtime story, every word of encouragement, everything would be noted, analyzed, evaluated. The invisible thread of Caldwell's gaze seemed to stretch farther than Malcolm had imagined. He sat down at the kitchen table and began writing. Not just routines, not just schedules, but observations. Jamal's mood, small reactions, his questions, his laughter. Each page became a record, a testament to the care he provided, the love he invested, the attention he paid to details others might overlook. Jamal appeared halfway through, curious about the notebook. "What's that, Dad?" Malcolm smiled, masking the tension. "Just something to help me remember the little things about us. You and me. Our day. Things that matter." Jamal grinned faintly. "Cool." Hours passed in quiet focus. Malcolm felt a strange mixture of pressure and clarity. Every entry in the notebook wasn't just documentation. It was proof of his life as a father, his consistency, his heart. Later that night, after tucking Jamal in, Malcolm looked at the pages filled with small details. He realized something crucial. The scrutiny, the observation, the preparation, it had changed him. Not fundamentally. Not his love or care for his son, but in the way he saw responsibility, in the depth of his awareness, in the weight of choices he once took for granted. Outside, the town lay in quiet stillness. But Malcolm knew better. The calm wasn't comfort, it was a prelude. A reminder that every ripple of action could influence the future in ways he couldn't yet see. And deep inside, he felt a quiet resolve, harder and steadier than ever before. No matter the scrutiny, no matter the judgment, no matter how closely observed, they would continue. Every small act, every moment of care, every choice mattered. Because the stakes were higher than ever, and he could no longer afford even the smallest lapse. The next morning, Harrisonville felt almost ordinary. Sunlight spilling across the streets, kids laughing on their way to school, the smell of fresh coffee wafting from the corner cafe. But Malcolm knew better. Ordinary was a thin veil over the tension that had taken residence in his chest. Every step he took, every glance he gave Jamal, every small act of care was now part of a larger, invisible evaluation. Jamal bounded down the stairs, backpack bouncing, a sketchbook clutched under one arm. "Dad, look!" he exclaimed, flipping the book open to show a drawing of the two of them at the park. Malcolm smiled, warmth flickering in his chest. Even in the midst of chaos, small joys persisted. "That's amazing, buddy," he said, ruffling Jamal's hair. "You really captured the tree near the fountain. I can see it." Jamal beamed. "I want to draw everything we do together." Malcolm laughed softly, feeling a mixture of pride and an unshakable anxiety. Everything they did together, the lunches, the homework, the walks, even these small moments of creativity, was now under Caldwell's silent scrutiny, whether he realized it or not. After dropping Jamal at school, Malcolm returned home to prepare for an unexpected visit. Elena Marks had sent a message the night before, requesting to stop by and review the notebook he had been keeping for Caldwell. Malcolm's heart had skipped a beat when he saw it. The meticulous documentation he had spent weeks compiling, every meal, every routine, every small interaction, was about to be examined. When Elena arrived, she didn't smile. Her face was calm, but her eyes carried the seriousness of someone bearing responsibility. She entered, carrying a small folder of her own, and set it on the kitchen table. "Mr. Reed," she began, her tone neutral but firm, "I wanted to review the logs you've been keeping for Jamal. Judge Caldwell requested clarity on your routines, your interactions, and the way you document care and responsibility." Malcolm nodded, pushing the notebook toward her. "I've recorded everything, as precisely as possible." Elena flipped through the pages, her pen tapping occasionally. "This is thorough," she said. "It shows dedication, awareness, and thoughtfulness. But it also raises questions about the level of scrutiny required in your daily life. Maintaining this level of documentation can be exhausting and stressful, not just for you but for Jamal." Malcolm exhaled slowly. "I know, but it's necessary. Every choice, every small act, it matters, especially now." Elena's gaze softened slightly. "I understand. But remember, Mr. Reed, consistency matters more than perfection. Caldwell isn't looking for an ideal father. He's looking for reliability, attentiveness, and stability. This notebook demonstrates effort and diligence, but your daily interactions, your presence, carry the greatest weight." Malcolm felt a strange mixture of relief and dread. The effort was recognized, yes, but the implications were heavy. Every interaction, even the simplest moments, was now a measure of judgment. Later that afternoon, Malcolm picked Jamal up from school. The boy ran to him, holding the sketchbook tightly. "Dad, look what I drew today." Malcolm smiled, kneeling to examine it. This one depicted their evening reading together, the soft glow of the lamp, Jamal's small fingers tracing words on the page. Malcolm's chest tightened. These small, ordinary moments, the ones he had once taken for granted, were now proof of care, of stability, of love under scrutiny. That night, after tucking Jamal into bed, Malcolm stared out the window at the quiet town. He realized something he hadn't allowed himself to admit fully: Caldwell's presence had changed him. Not just as a father, but in how he perceived every choice, every action, every interaction. Every small act had become monumental because stakes were no longer abstract. They were real. Somewhere, unseen but present, Caldwell's gaze lingered, invisible threads connecting past kindnesses, present diligence, and the uncertain future waiting just beyond tomorrow. Malcolm exhaled slowly. The weight was heavier than ever, but he felt a quiet determination rise within him. No matter how closely watched, no matter the judgment, no matter how high the stakes, he would continue. Every small choice mattered. And he would prove, silently, through steadfast consistency and care, that he was the father Jamal deserved. Outside, the streets of Harrisonville shimmered faintly in the evening light, ordinary yet tense, a reflection of the life Malcolm now navigated. And deep inside he knew the real test, the one that would measure not only his actions but his heart, was still ahead. The morning air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of wet pavement and pine from the outskirts of Harrisonville. Malcolm stirred his coffee absent-mindedly, staring out the kitchen window at the town slowly coming to life. It should have been ordinary, but ordinary had been stripped from his days ever since Caldwell's scrutiny had begun. Jamal bounded down the stairs, holding a small stack of papers. "Dad, I got an award today for reading in class." Malcolm's chest swelled with pride. "That's amazing, buddy. You've been working hard and it shows." He ruffled Jamal's hair and felt a flicker of something he hadn't allowed himself in weeks: hope. But even in this moment of pride, Malcolm's mind drifted to the coming days. The formal custody review was approaching, and Caldwell's watchful presence weighed heavily on every thought. Every decision he made, even small ones, could tilt the outcome. After dropping Jamal at school, Malcolm returned home, the house quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. He reviewed his notes again, double-checking the logs, routines, and observations he had compiled for Caldwell. Every entry mattered. Every small act of care now served as proof of his stability and devotion. A knock at the door startled him. Elena Marks stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, her expression serious yet calm. She placed a small envelope on the kitchen table. "This came from Judge Caldwell," she said. "He requested additional clarification on a few recent events, specifically regarding your interaction with the twins and your consistency in responding to unexpected situations. Malcolm's stomach tightened. He opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a brief note from Caldwell, outlining the judge's interest in seeing how Malcolm handled an unforeseen challenge, one that required patience, quick thinking, and empathy. Elena looked at him, her voice steady. "He wants to observe you again, Mr. Reed. Not just your routines but how you respond under pressure. It's a critical factor in his evaluation." Malcolm swallowed hard. "I understand. When is this observation?" "Tomorrow," Elena replied. "He'll be present, discreetly observing. But it will require you to handle whatever happens calmly and consistently, just as you would any other day." Malcolm nodded slowly, feeling the weight of the task pressing down on him. Every choice, every reaction, every act of care would now be scrutinized, measured, and recorded. That night, he tucked Jamal into bed, pausing for a moment to study his son's face. "Buddy, tomorrow might be a little unusual, but we'll handle it like we always do. Steady, patient, together." Jamal nodded sleepily. "Okay, Dad." After the door closed, Malcolm returned to the kitchen. He spread out the notebook, reviewing the logs, the interactions, and every small detail he had documented. Each page represented not just routine but evidence that he was a capable, loving father. But as he stared at the notes, a creeping doubt settled in. Could he remain steady under direct observation? Could he maintain patience if the situation became unpredictable? Outside, the streets were quiet, the town indifferent to the tension building in Malcolm's home. He realized that the real test wasn't just about routines or logs, it was about his character under pressure, his instinct to act rightly, and the love he carried for Jamal in every choice. He exhaled slowly, feeling the weight and the responsibility settle heavily on his shoulders. Tomorrow would reveal more than Caldwell could ever learn from documents alone. And Malcolm knew deep in his heart that whatever happened next, every decision would ripple forward, changing the course of his life and Jamal's in ways he couldn't yet predict. The courthouse in Harrisonville sat low and gray against a sky that couldn't decide whether it wanted to rain. Malcolm stood at the front steps with Jamal beside him, his son's small hand wrapped tightly around his own. Jamal wore the same jacket he insisted was his lucky one, even though the zipper stuck halfway up. Malcolm hadn't corrected him. Today didn't feel like a day for corrections. Inside, the hallway smelled faintly of old paper and floor cleaner. Their footsteps echoed as Elena Marks led them toward the courtroom. She moved with quiet confidence, but Malcolm noticed the tension in her shoulders. That alone told him how thin the margin was. They took their seats near the front. Malcolm scanned the room without meaning to, his eyes stopping when the side door opened. Judge Nathaniel Caldwell entered without ceremony. He looked different outside the context of authority. No robe yet. No raised bench. Just a tall man with tired eyes and a posture that carried years of decisions he couldn't undo. For a brief second, his gaze landed on Malcolm. There was recognition there. Not surprise. Not judgment. Something heavier. The twins were brought in moments later. Lena and Brooke sat with a court-appointed guardian, their legs swinging slightly, shoes scuffing the floor. They looked smaller here. Less like the brave little girls who had waited by the roadside that night. Lena spotted Malcolm first. Her face lit up, then froze, uncertain. Brooke followed her gaze and leaned closer to her sister. Malcolm gave a small nod. Not a wave. Not a smile that might feel like pressure. Just acknowledgement. The kind you give when you don't know what's allowed anymore. The hearing began quietly. Elena spoke first, outlining Malcolm's history. The missed rent years ago. The long hours. The mistakes he didn't deny. Then she spoke of consistency. Of records. Of teachers' statements. Of a boy who showed up to school clean, fed, and emotionally steady. Caldwell listened without interrupting. Then the guardian spoke on behalf of the twins. About their mother's passing. About their father's absence. About how, despite the chaos, the girls spoke often of the man who helped us. Not a savior. Not a hero. Just a man. Caldwell finally put on his robe and took the bench. He leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Reed," he said, voice calm but firm. I've observed you closely over the past weeks. Not just through reports, but through presence. Malcolm stood. His palms were damp. Yes, Your Honor. You didn't know who I was when you helped my daughters. Malcolm's breath caught. The room went still. You didn't ask questions that night, Caldwell continued. You didn't demand anything. You acted because you believed it was right. Malcolm swallowed. They needed help. Caldwell nodded once. That's the difference. He turned his attention briefly to Jamal. Your son speaks highly of you. Jamal sat up straighter. Caldwell returned his gaze to Malcolm. This court often sees parents perform under pressure. What I looked for was not performance. It was instinct. The silence stretched. Mr. Reed, Caldwell said, your custody remains fully intact. Malcolm felt the words before he understood them. And, Caldwell added, I will be personally overseeing the twins' transition into long-term guardianship. There are conditions, of course. Counseling. Stability checks. He paused. But I would like to ask you something off the record. Malcolm nodded, barely breathing. My daughters trust you, Caldwell said. If you are willing, I would like you to remain a presence in their lives. Not as an obligation. As a choice. Lena looked up then, eyes wide. Brooke gripped her sister's hand. Malcolm's voice was unsteady but honest. I already made that choice. The hearing adjourned quietly. No gavel slam. No dramatic release. Just people standing, gathering coats, returning to lives that would never quite be the same. Outside, the rain finally fell. Light. Steady. Jamal tilted his head back, letting the drops hit his face. Guess my jacket really was lucky. Malcolm laughed softly, the sound surprising him. Across the steps, Lena hesitated, then ran forward and hugged Malcolm around the waist. Brooke followed a second later. Caldwell watched from a distance. He didn't interrupt. He didn't rush them. Some things didn't need to be ruled on. As they parted, Malcolm looked down at Jamal, then back at the twins, understanding something quietly profound. Fate didn't always announce itself. Sometimes it waited on the side of a road, asking who you were when no one was watching. If this story stayed with you, if it made you pause or think or feel something real, take a second to like the video and subscribe. Stories like this don't come from perfection. They come from moments that test who we are. And if you believe small choices can change more than one life, let us know in the comments.